Sri Abhishek Singhvi.
Sir, I rise to support the bill. The bill is a very limited measure, a limited exercise in respect of some specific concepts, definitions and powers. So the first point I wish to submit, sir, humbly, is that one should not look at this bill as the panacea and the answer to all evils. This is not the answer to all problems. Many of the problems mentioned by the honorable members are genuine situations, but they are really relating to policing problems. They really relate to implementation problems. This is providing a legal framework for implementation, and I think the fact that this bill does not address other issues should not mean that what issues it does address are bad or wrong. Secondly, sir, the key word underlying this bill, I submit, is the word flexibility and greater autonomy. We cannot, on the one hand, look upon India as a world global economic power, competing with the likes of China and developed countries like USA, and at the same time require the apex bank of this country to constantly go back to the central government or to other authorities for permission or for empowering the increase or lowering of rates. This flexibility is extremely important in a global market, in a global scenario, and as you know, some of these scenarios involve very fast-moving, fluid situations which require systemic fine-tuning changes on the spur of the moment at short periods. Consequently, for example, a provision as it existed earlier that you cannot alter the ratio below 3% is something which in an emerging fast-moving situation would be an unnecessary obstructive limitation on the powers of the apex bank, and I support the clear element of flexibility given by removing that lower limit. Take for example the issue of derivatives. There is no reason why an apex bank dealing in the current global scenario with a whole host of public-private participatory exercises should not have the power to touch or deal in derivatives in the manner provided now. Derivatives are a very important aspect of the market. I think the definition is very comprehensive, and prior to this, the degree of autonomy, flexibility and empowerment required to deal with derivatives was not available to the apex bank, and I think this again is a welcome move. Indeed, it is something in conformity with a global paradigm. Several other apex banks in several other parts of the world have that power, and therefore there is no reason why the Reserve Bank of India should not have that power. Sir, there is one point of definition which I think does require a comment or an explanation by the Honourable Minister. If you see the amendment in clause 2 which amends section 17(6) capital A, it does so by adding an explanation which has a definition of both repo and reverse repo. Now this explanational definition of repo and reverse repo, which is under 12AB at page 2 under the explanation A and B, is different from the definition of the same terms repo and reverse repo in 45U, which is given on the under clause 4 of the bill. Clearly the intent is that as far as the amendment to section 17 is concerned, the repo definition is limited to securities of the central government or state government or local authority as specified by the central government. This limitation is absent in the definition of the same terms in clause 4 which deals with section 45U. Now the intent is clear, but I would request that the Minister may consider in his closing remarks to explain the rationale of why in the same act, in two parts of the same act, a different definitional approach is taken. Sir, as I said, I had heard the objections raised or the comments made, and I think all of them are in positive, good, constructive spirit. But as I said, many of them relate to policing and implementational issues and not to the legal framework which this Act seeks to provide. And therefore, as I said, issues like, for example, the policy and the movement of gold or direct and indirect taxes or evasion are issues which have their relevance in their place, but may not be addressable in the limited focus of this Act, which deals with instruments in particular. Lastly, sir, a point was raised about a possible contradiction with Section 45V as provided in Clause 4 of this bill. Now, it is true that 45V has an opening word which is a non-obstant, notwithstanding. Anything contained in one particular act is mentioned, Securities Act, and also any other law. And as the Honourable Member rightly pointed out, the Securities Law also mentions non-obstant, notwithstanding any other law. So, there is a apparent or a plausible or a possibility of a collision. But may I submit that it is well established, and it's a well-known rule of construction and interpretation and implementation, that both a later act and a special act will always prevail. So, if the intent is that this is the RBI Act which deals with the RBI, it deals with specific parts of the RBI, it's a later act and it's an act special to the RBI, so in the normal course also it will prevail. But one other reason why 45V may not be any problem, as the Honourable Member pointed out, and that is this: the non-obstant clause which is mentioned in the Securities Act is part of the Securities Act, whereas this bill is correctly drafted. 45V1 says, notwithstanding anything contained in the Securities Act itself. In other words, the Securities Act is overridden, and therefore the clause of the Securities Act which has a separate non-obstant will also be overridden. So I think there will be no problem on that, but I think the slight difference in the definitions of repo and reverse repo would require some detailed comment by the Honourable Minister. Sir, I support this bill.
Thank you. Honourable Minister.